to make some kind of hard decisions with some of our kids. And, some of those things, when you get to a certain age, you go, well, it might be time. And, the last 2 days kind of let Brother Hay know I'm not as young as I used to be. And we'll leave that at that, right? And, but just keep her in prayer and Derv. And I just tell you the truth. I don't worry so much about things. I learned a long time ago, if we get all bent out of shape and worried about everything, how many know we'll always be worrying? I mean, I'm just being honest with you. You'll be worrying about something every day. But if you're watching by YouTube or Facebook, we want to say welcome. So we're all the way down tonight to number 3, and hopefully I get 3 and 4 done, and we'll finish this one. And I'm going to try. And we're on the paper. It says even Jesus needed help. Anybody need one? I got a couple left. You need one, Randy? I can't unstick them, so I have to let you. I can't get my hands to work like that very well sometimes. But Romans 15:1, we read this, and this is where we're going to start. It says, we then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. And as we get started, I want you to think about what I wrote under there. It says, never forget, you might be strong today and weak tomorrow. Have you ever noticed that some things that you can handle, and then other things you just can't? It's just overwhelming to you. And one of the things I learned a long time ago, don't be too critical of other people, because not everybody has the same makeup. Does that make sense? And sometimes it's kind of hard to explain to people, but we always need to keep in mind that how many in here are afraid of spiders? We got any spider afraider people here? Sister Helen. Hey, listen, our son Ryan, I kid you not, if there's a spider in the house, he goes and gets his wife to kill it. It is hilarious. It is so funny. But he has a snake. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny, and everybody has those things, right? And what we need to understand is that's why God says, listen, don't ever forsake the assembling of yourself together. It's not so the church can have a large number on the roll. It's not for all those other things, but we are stronger together than we'll ever be separate, okay? There's some people, believe it or not, that are afraid of the dark, and I always laugh about that. But there's some people, they're not kidding. They're dead serious, and we got to be careful, because if you're not afraid of the dark, how do you know it's easy to make fun of? And I'm one of them guys, like with spiders, I'm like, really? I can't believe you're afraid of that little bitty spider. Now, one time when I was in the Middle East, I will tell you, if you want something interesting, look up this thing called a camel spider. And when you see that camel spider, let's just say they are huge. And, military people get bored, so we used to have them fighting with scorpions. Just so you know, a lot of times scorpion won. That's kind of crazy, huh? But anyway, I remember the first time I saw one of those, I thought, boy, could I have some fun with that. With a lot of people. But not everybody's like that, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's scary, huh? And the reason why Brother Hay's saying that, Ryan's always had a snake. His snake did die, the one they had now. But he's always had snakes. And you all know, Brother Hay, I've never met a snake that will survive my presence. I'm just telling you. You know what? I don't care. You can have all the little sayings you want. You can tell me that snake's a good snake. Yeah, there's a good snake when I know it's not alive. Yeah, as long as it's not in my realm, we're going to be okay. And I used to, yeah, I know. But I always laugh because my boys, Brian and Bubba, they like snakes. And I'm like, okay. And I always told them the same thing. If that snake gets out, that snake is dead. So just so you know, okay? But everybody has something, right? But when we come together, you got somebody to get rid of the spiders and somebody to get rid of the snakes. Does that make sense? And we're okay. And we don't have to worry about that. And so that's why it's important to know that when we get together in church, it's not just for the things that people think it is. And I've been praying for a long time that the church would kind of wake up a little bit. And I hope that it will, because sometimes churches go down crazy avenues. You know, there are trends that come up, and it's amazing, Brother, hey, how many people just get in line and follow the trend. And I used to tell Brother Michael this all the time. I said, listen, you can figure out what churches are going to be doing by watching the churches every once in a while that are on TV. When they make a change, then all of a sudden you see all these other churches making the change to look like them. You got to remember, it's not the methods. It's not the building. It's not the organization. And I love the Church of God. Don't think I'm being like that. I love the Church of God. But I just want you to understand with Brother Hay, it's about Jesus, right? It's about him crucified. It's about teaching people to have a relationship with him and helping them along their path to do that. It's not about who has the most people. I used to always laugh. This will tell you how old Brother Hay is. And Michael will remember this. He'll probably laugh too. But we used to have a lady came to church. And in the little building, we had a little thing on the back where you put how many people came to church. And that was her job. Every week was make sure them numbers were right. And it was funny. And one time we had somebody visiting. Well, her problem was, I don't know if she couldn't count very well. She had some problems. And you probably figured out, Brother Randy, who it was. It was Sister Irene. She'd been gone for a long time. But anyway, that was her job. And so I remember we had somebody from an official that was with us. And I don't know, we had about 50 or 60 people that day. And she had 28 on the board. And I was laughing because they came to me after church and said, hey, you need to get that board fixed. And I'm thinking, it didn't even click in Brother Hayes' mind. I know you're going to think I'm kidding, but it really never clicked in my mind at first what they were even talking about. And I'm thinking, board, what, you know. And then I realized they were talking about the count that we had back there. They said, you had this many people because I counted them, and she should never put that number up until, but here's what the deal was. We had Sunday school back then, and when Sunday school started, when Brother Hay started, whoever was there got counted. It didn't matter if 50 people come in after that. You know, it didn't matter if there were people who skipped Sunday school and came to church. They didn't get counted in her count. And I told him, I said, well, I'm sorry, man, but I don't ever pay no attention to that board, and I don't think anybody else does, but that's her job, and I'm not going to go yell at her, and whatever that board says is fine with me. And I want you to understand that the church goes down them paths, and it turns into a numbers thing. It turns into this thing, and how much money did you raise, and all those kind of things. Here's what I'll tell you. If you have the presence of the Lord, you'll have everything you need. You might struggle. You might have hard times. You might have ups and downs. But at the end of the day, I want you to understand when we're praying, whether it's my brother, whether it's Fred, whether it's this little baby, whether it's whoever it is, would you rather have what people have as a formula or the presence of the Lord involved in the circumstance? I'll take the Lord every time. Does that make sense? And so one of the things we have to learn is that we're stronger together and not to be worried. And the other thing is, I hate to tell you this, but it says that we're not supposed to be pleasing ourselves. And here's where it gets real personal real quick. Well, I don't like them. Okay. And so I'm not going to start the whole love and like thing in the church. That's been an argument going on here since the beginning of time. Right, Mike? Yeah. I don't know that. If you're getting involved, that's up to you. But I always used to tell people, look, you can't love somebody if you don't like them. And they say, well, I can do that. Well, okay, good luck with that. Because here's the problem. How are you going to please that person you don't like? Anybody in here go around pleasing people you don't like? Now think about that for a minute. Yeah, it's a true saying, right? But here's Brother Hayes' take. Sometimes we forget that we have to get ourselves out of the picture sometimes. And is it hard? How about if somebody does you wrong? Okay, how about if somebody's taking advantage of you? That even gets to a different level real quick, right? And a lot of times when people, over the years, I've had people come to me and say, brother, hey, I'm going over here because you're just not a deep enough teacher. I always tell them, okay. But do you know the simplest things are the hardest things to fulfill? How about when this says that you got to please your neighbor above yourself? I'm just being honest with you. It sounds like a really simple thing, right? But if you really follow that rule, how difficult is it? See, and a lot of times what I always tell people is, okay, but here's why it happens. And it says not only that we're supposed to please him, but for his good to edification. And I know they were playing a song on the radio today when Kaylee and I were coming home, and I'm not sure who sings it, but it said, let my life preach. In other words, let my life be what preaches, not my words. In other words, how I live, not what I say. And I was teasing a couple of the young girls over there when we were talking. I said, you all understand this because Sister A had said something. I said, don't worry, I've been working on it for 53 years. I said, but here's what I learned. And I said, once you have kids, you'll understand when your kids are grown, at some point, no matter what you say, they're going to do what they want to do, right? They're going to go down their own road. I said, but I just want you to know. Yep. And I told him, I said, you could tell them all you want to, but it doesn't mean that they're going to listen. I said, so, you can tell them and help them avoid problems, but it doesn't always work that way. But what I was really trying to get across to them is sometimes even when you don't want to listen, you need to listen. But don't do it in a way that destroys them, because what this is talking about, and I know Brother Singletary was here, what it's talking about is discouraging people so bad because every time they make a move, it's wrong. Every time they breathe, it's wrong. You know what I mean? It gets pretty discouraging. And it's why a lot of people aren't in church, because we have all this stuff going on. And my thing has always been, my job is to point them to Christ and to lead them to him the best I can. They have to accept him. But it's not my job to change their life because I can't. I have to put that in Jesus' hands. And sometimes it takes a long time. Man, he's still working on me. And I've been doing this a long time. And I still have my moments. And, it's kind of like when I was up there last night with Tyrone and we got there and it was kind of a big mess and everything. But you have to go through the emergency room, all that kind of stuff with the way that was working out. And as I walked through that emergency room, my heart broke. And I know it's going to sound crazy to you, but I know some of them that were in there because of addiction. Some of them that were in there is because it was cold outside and the wind was blowing. And they didn't have nowhere else to go. And then somewhere in there being escorted by police. I never saw so many police in an emergency room in my life. I was like, of course, I'm from Portales, so, it's kind of funny. And Kaylee and I got there real early this morning, because I had to be there for the procedure, and they didn't know when they were going to do it or whatever. And so as Kaylee and I are going in there, there's like 8 sheriff's deputies getting out of their cars, and they're all going into the hospital. And a couple of them are riding the elevators with us. And I can tell you what it is. There's people in there that they're guarding. That's why they're there, okay? But here's the thing. You know what? It doesn't matter what a person's been involved in. How many know the only way they're ever going to turn to Jesus is if we can reach out to them? And that is the hardest thing in the world to do. And that's where the love and like thing goes in Brother Hayes' mind. But I said, that's not for me tonight. We'll leave that go. And also, just remember, you might be strong today. You might be the guy that can handle the spider, but you might not be the guy who can handle the snake. Just remember that, okay? And then Galatians 6:2, this is one of my favorite ones. It says, bear one another's burdens, and that way so fulfill the law of Christ. And I always have this thought in the back of my mind. Have you ever made this statement where they're getting what they deserve? Be careful. Be real careful when you say those things. Because, all of us, if we got what we deserve, we'd all be in big trouble. And we have to remember that we're saved by grace. And what's made the difference in our lives is what Jesus has done in us. Okay? And sometimes it's kind of hard, but sometimes people have things in their life that are just so burdensome, they can't carry them by themselves. And when people end up at the end of their place, where sometimes they get to that place where they feel completely hopeless and that nobody cares, we all know what that ends up in a lot of times. And it's not always, them taking their life, but sometimes it ends up with them going so far over things and so far into an addiction or whatever the thing might be, right? And sometimes it's because nobody ever reached out to them and understood that there was a burden. One of the hardest things for Brother Hay to understand, in my mind, if somebody hurt one of my kids or one of those things, I don't know how I would, I kind of know how I would respond, but I would need a lot of help. We'll just put it that way. Does that make sense? But imagine you lose your child because somebody was drinking or whatever the case might be. Now think about that for just a minute. There's 2 ways that that's going to go in your life. You can allow the Lord to come in to help heal and help carry that burden with you, right? And that's what we're talking about. There are times even Jesus needed help, which would be the next phrase that we read. And I think about this all the time. But how many know some people turn to so many things because they can't get over that loss? And I know Brother Randy and I talk about this a lot. He's had a lot of loss in his life, but he never blamed God. Sister Hay and I have had a lot of loss in our life, but I never blamed God. But that doesn't take away the burden that you carry sometimes. Does that make sense? And sometimes in order to get through those things, you have to have people that don't throw you away. And one of the hardest things in the world to do is to be on and to reach out to people when nobody else will. And when people say they're just hopeless. And I'll tell you, I've never met a hopeless person in my life. Now, I met some pretty mean ones. There's always hope. Now I have, and I hate to tell you this, I have come face to face with some evil and with some people that only God could do the changing. And sometimes when you come face to face with that evil, there are things that have to be done, and we'll just leave it at that, okay? Because otherwise the evil will overcome. It's just that simple. And I look at that and I listen, and we all know we got so many crazy things going on in our country right now. And I understand this whole immigration thing, and I understand that there are going to be things that happen that probably shouldn't happen, all that kind of stuff. And Larry probably laugh at this, but he was only a couple years younger, but sometimes that kept him out of trouble. Because sometimes if he would have been with me, he probably would have gotten more trouble. and I remember one time when I was we didn't live in the best of places. Okay, that's why Brother Hay understands some of these things. But I am thankful there were always people that were willing to put their arms around us and take us to church. Okay, and people that would reach out to us even when a lot of people wouldn't. And where we lived, I remember when people talk about police harassing people, I know I was on their list a lot. And I didn't do anything. I still got my excuses. I always say, it wasn't me. Every once in a while, well, you'll remember when you work at Walmart, when something would happen, I'd look around and go, hey, it wasn't me. And then the cashier would look at me and I'd say something like this, oh, I'm sorry, it's just an automatic response. It wasn't me. But the reason Brother Hay is telling you that is I want you to think about this. No matter what, there is no perfect system out there. The only perfect person was Jesus, and they crucified him. Always remember that. He did the right things. There was nothing in him that they should have took his life. But he gave it. They really could have never took it. He willingly gave it. And what I want you to think about is when we're talking about responding to others, helping them with their burdens, reaching out to them, putting our arms around them, all those kind of things. Remember, we need to be willing to do that too. But man, that people always tell me, well, you don't teach deep enough. I'm just telling you, if you learn that little secret, I promise you, you can spend 100 years in this life and you'll struggle with that till the day you die. Because how many know we can always do better? There's always another thing that we can do, another person that we can reach, and we should never be in that place. And I didn't have the scripture written out, but in Matthew 16:24, sometimes we have to help them pick up their cross and follow Jesus. We like to say, hey, you got to pick up your cross and follow him, right? Well, remember when Jesus was carrying his to Calvary, right? He had to have the person that came alongside him and pick up his cross and help him carry it. And so what Brother Hay is telling you, when you pick up your cross and start following Jesus, remember, he'll help you pick up your cross, right? He'll help you carry it. But here's the secret. You have to accept it. That was in Matthew 16:24. Michael put it up there. It said, then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Sounds so simple until you put it into practice. And then all of a sudden you begin to realize, for example, sometimes you have to say no to the flesh. How many know the flesh don't like to be told no? Okay, when your body says you're hot, okay, can you fix that without cooling off? How about if it says you're cold? Pretty hard to fix it, right? Until you can get to a place where you can warm up. And people always tell me, oh, I don't have no problem with the flesh, brother. Hey, I got this thing. I got it under control. I always laugh. We can't even control something that simple. And I remember sometimes being in some really kind of different places. And yep, your mouth. It is. But do you know what else? It's hard to allow him to be in control. You know, can you imagine a Navy SEAL when they go in that water off of San Diego? Well, a lot of people don't know the water in California is cold. Okay? It is not warm. I remember the first time we went to the beach, and everybody's running down to the beach in California. I'm like, hey. And I was like, well, that's one of those times you might as well give up because they're not going to listen anyway, right? Man, they hit that water. Whoop! And all of a sudden they realize, hey, we're not in Florida anymore, right? In Florida, the water's warm. And I laugh because I remember one time when we went to UI to Florida, we were doing some stuff there, and everybody wanted to go swimming, and I said, hey, we're in the panhandle of Florida. This is like March. I'm telling you that water's cold. They're like, yeah, but it's hot, man. There's no way that water can be cold. I said, okay. I promise you, they didn't stay in that water very long because there's a breeze usually by the water. And when you get cold, anybody know what happens when you get cold? You start shivering. So when the Navy SEALs go out there to train, they have to learn to control their emotion in order to stay in that water. Have you ever thought about that? They got to learn to control the chattering of their teeth. They got to learn to overcome the flesh that says, hey, man, get me out of here. Have you ever been so tired that you just want to go to sleep? I mean, I've had people tell me, hey, you can't fall asleep standing up. I always tell them, you can. Just take my word for it. You can. Okay, just make sure you're leaning against the wall. And if you're one of them guys that move a lot in your sleep, you're probably in trouble because you're going to wake up when you hit the floor or wherever you're at, the ground. But I promise you, you can't fall asleep standing up. But you think about it, even the toughest people can only go so long without sleep. Do you know what happens? They start hallucinating. They start seeing things that are not there, because guess what? We don't like to admit it, but as long as we're in this world, we are limited by this flesh. And it don't matter how strong you are, don't matter how tough you are, don't matter about any of those things. And that's why we got to have help. And when Jesus is telling us to do these things, he's doing it from a leadership position. In other words, he's doing it. This was before he had went to the cross, but he went to the cross to demonstrate to us that we can do it. And it's hard sometimes to lock in on those kind of things in our life. And the flesh is pretty tough. Now, this is another one of my favorite verses, and we only got a couple, so I'm going to do my best to finish it. I'm pretty sure I can. It says, come unto me, all of you that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. For I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It's Matthew 11:28-30. And I always think about this, because Jesus tells us to take his yoke upon us. But do you know nobody ever talks about that next phrase? What does it say? Learn of me. In other words, he's going to teach us how we can overcome this flesh. Now, that's pretty frightening when you think about it sometimes, right? Because the flesh is very powerful. And I know Sister Ray and I was talking about that today. When my mom got towards the end and she was struggling to breathe, it was difficult for her. When I talked to my brother today, he said, I just can't get up. I understand those things, right? How many know at that point in time, those things overpower you? And how many know the first thing they attack is your faith? The first thing if you're not careful, that will come into question will be, God, why am I going through this? And Lord, if you're with me, why is this happening? And one of the things that is so hard for us to get our arms around, and I think about this a lot whenever I'm feeling sorry for myself, I think about Jesus being nailed to that cross. And here's the difference between him and I. He really could have called 10,000 angels, and he could have ended it, boop, right then and there. How many know Brother Hay don't have that kind of influence? I don't have that kind of power. And it's a good thing I don't, because I probably would have called those angels into service a few times when I probably shouldn't have. It'd be like, Lord, you know what? Why don't we just get them guys over here and we'll take care of this and I'll just stand here and watch, right? But it don't work that way, right? We don't have that power to do that. And what makes what Jesus did to us so special is his willingness to do it. Think about that. So we complain, the preacher preached too long. Okay, it's not Brother Hayes' fault. I try my best to tell Michael at noon you got to be done. Okay, I've been working on him for a long time, and I always laugh. But here's the thing. No two people are alike, right? You can't hold Brother Michael to be Brother Hay. I remember when I went to Bible school back then, there was a guy named Reverend Ike. Anybody know who he is? Some of the older ones will know. He's a black minister. Anyway, when Brother Hay was young, I could preach like him. And I know it sounds funny, but I could preach like him. I could sound just like him. But I'm not him. But I remember telling some of the guys, we always used to talk about this. I go, I'm not him. And they used to tell me, hey, man, if you would just do that, you could get all these people because they all know who he is. I go, but that's the wrong thought. I don't want people to know who I am. I want people to know who Jesus is. So I have to be who I am, who Jesus called. Does that make sense? Then came along this guy who used to like to blow on people all the time. And he used to, and I can't think of his name, just Benny Hinn. Anyway, his name went from me. His name is Benny Hinn. And so when I went to Bible school to finish up my degree the second time to go a little bit higher in my degree, and so I'm there. Of course, now I'm the 40-year-old guy with all these guys that are 20, right? I remember how I thought when I was 20, and I remember what the guy said. Hey, this is what you need to do. But one of the funniest things was watching them guys blow on people. And so they're trying to teach them how to be preachers and how to be pastors. Y'all think, it's not as easy just get up here and whoop, something comes. You better study and you better know what you're talking about. You better put in the time ahead of time. And more importantly, you better make sure you're in touch with the one that's supposed to give you what you need to say. You'll end up like Reverend Ike, who led a lot of people astray. You know what his favorite saying was? He said money wasn't the root of all evil. Here's how he changed God's word. He said it was the lack of money that was the root of all evil. Do you know a lot of Christian people never picked that up? Of course, he came out in his Bentley, had his Rolex watches and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just here to tell you. And do you know how many good people followed a false teaching? And listen, it happens in every organization. I've had people give me books and tell me this is what you need to do, brother. Hey, I will tell you there's been times in my life that the Lord has blessed me to help people with certain things, but I never helped them with the process in my mind that I would get what I give back, but only better. Here's what I learned. Because the example that Jesus gave us, that's not the example that he gave us. Because, you see, here's what he said. Jesus said, as long as we're in this life, you better understand that you're going to have some issues. You're going to have some problems. You're going to have some things come against you. You're going to have to make your mind up about some battles. It doesn't matter if you're as young as Richard, or I'm probably, I don't know, between me and Fred who's the oldest tonight, but I think I am. Sister A's quick to tell me. But it don't matter. Yeah, usually it's Sister Darlene, so we always have it out. I pick on her. But but I look at that. It doesn't matter our age or what we've done or any of those kind of things. What we got to get in our mind is that Jesus died equally for all of us. But he went through stuff. That's how when we first started this whole thing, we have to learn of him. Don't let those things pull you away from your relationship with God. Because through all that, Jesus never lost sight of who the Father was. Think about that. He never lost sight of what his purpose was. He never lost sight of what he came here, what his mission was, what he was supposed to do. Now, I think it's cool that one of our pastor's daughters going to the Philippines. And I think that's really good, a mission trip. Sometimes people go on the missions trips, they don't come back. We need to be praying for her. Right now, especially, the Philippines is a dangerous place. You know, they have Al-Qaeda there. They have ISIS there. They have people that, you know, and it's bad. Yep, it's not like it was when Brother Andy was probably in the Navy and they stopped there. Yep. And you didn't go into the hills. That a good way of putting it? You had to stay in certain places. But I look at those kind of things and I understand. But here's a young woman that's determined in her heart to follow after Jesus no matter what the consequences might be. Okay? So what I used to tell a lot of young pastors, and they would all get mad at me, I go, what if God has you pastoring a church of 7 people your whole life? But what if the next Billy Graham walks into your church and you've been there for a very, very long time and they give their heart to the Lord and God uses them to preach to literally millions of people? And what a lot of people don't know is Billy Graham went into this little church. They didn't even have a preacher. Well, he started preaching. I know this sounds funny. They don't have the statue there anymore. They took it down. Tampa, Florida. Yep, he's on the streets preaching. Does he? Yeah, he used to preach on the streets. And what happened was before he went through all those processes, what if those men that were doing a Bible study that morning said, no point in us being together. There's only 3. Let's go get coffee and donuts. That's why I always bring donuts so you all don't leave. Show up for church because we'll have donuts and coffee for you. I'm just teasing. But you think about those kind of things, right? You think about people. Robinson was a really, I don't even know if he's still preaching, James Robinson, but I think he is. Yeah. Yeah, he was adopted. There's a lot of things that happen. But what if nobody ever reached out to him? And at one time, his church, man, I mean, they were reaching millions. I don't know how big it is now. He's older than Brother Hayes, so I'm not even sure if he's still preaching. But, you know, they would go to Africa, put in wells for villages, do all these kind of things. Do you know he had a crisis in his life and was flying in an airplane and wasn't even sure if he was a Christian? And the reason Brother Hay is telling you this, at the end when Jesus, you remember what he said? He says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Even Jesus needed help at certain points in his life. He felt the weight of it all. He felt the weight of everybody's sin, not just the sin of the people there at that moment, but the sin of all those that would come after. I believe with all my heart he felt all of that. You know, I've heard preachers get up and preach and say, hey, you know, Jesus never felt the stripes when they were put on his back because he had so much faith. I'm like, buddy, you know, sometimes you can take a little bit of a license with God's word. Well, I mean, you might try to explain things a certain way, but you better be very careful. I believe with all my heart, Brother Randy, he felt every one of those. I believe with all my heart when they pushed that crown of thorns down on his head, I believe he felt that. That's right. And not only would people quit and run, but think about this. He did that without being guilty. Think about what that says. That's why Brother Hay kind of picked this little subject, and I know I got to hurry so I can close it, because otherwise I'll still be talking. I could talk about this all night, but it's important, and I'm going to go on down there. But it says you'll find rest unto your souls, and the reason why it says he was meek and lowly in heart. In other words, he never felt above everybody. He reached out to everybody. Okay? And that's where our rest comes, in leaning into him. And his burden is light and his yoke is easy, but it doesn't mean serving him is not without problems and issues. Isaiah 40:31 says, those that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. I want you to know God renews our strength. Isaiah 40:29, he gives power to the faint. Ephesians 6:10, be strong in the Lord. Philippians 4:13, everybody likes to, I love this, everybody likes to quote this, but how many practice it? I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. Except forgive that person that made me mad, right? Except help that person that took advantage of me, right? It's hard, right? That's why Brother Hayes says, people say, oh, you're teaching too shallow. No, you're just living it too shallow. I promise you, if you live out God's word to its fullness, I guarantee you'll realize just how deep God's word is. We just barely scratch the surface from day to day in our lives, okay? And remember, he's our refuge, he's our strength, Psalms 46:1, Psalms 42. And we used to sing this song all the time. It's a little chorus. He brought me out of the miry clay and set my feet on the rock to stay. That's Psalms 42. And I'll close, and that way I can make sure I get done. Romans 8:31, it says, who can be against us? And I was teasing some of the girls today because, Sister Hay, she was tough when she was young. And I told them, she's talking about doing these things. And here's what I told those young ladies. I said, see, here's what the deal was. Sister A lot shorter than me, okay? And I said, when Sister A was being rowdy and being mean and being tough, I said, you want to know why a lot of times nobody responded to her? Because I was standing behind her. See, now she'll never admit that. And I hate to tell you this, do you know how many Christians never admit it's Jesus who's standing behind them that's getting them through it? Have we ever thought about that? You know what Brother Hay is saying? Because our strength is limited. Our ability is limited. Our way to think about things is limited. Yep, our ability to even control things in our life sometimes, right? In our emotions. I think about those Navy SEALs all the time. They're always some of my favorite people. I never pick on the Navy too much. The Army, we'll leave that alone tonight. I'll be good. I always give Brother Singletary a hard time. But the Army guys were some of my favorite guys. Some of the Navy that were Marines and Navy, they go together. Some of them guys are my favorite guys. Hey. Oh, yeah. And here's what's cool. Whenever Brother Hay was out there, it wasn't me that those guys were afraid of. They're like, that little scrawny Air Force guy, oh, yeah. But you should see my buddies back here. Those buddies of mine back there, that's who they were worried about. They weren't worried about me. Okay? And I was glad they were back there. and I never once ever made light of them. Whether it was Army Rangers that I was with or the Marine Special Forces or whatever it was, wherever I was at, whatever I was doing. And, Ryan and I were talking the other day. It's kind of funny. If Brother Hay lives to be 105, I can tell all my secrets. Yeah, because it'd be 75 years and my little thing that I had to sign would be up. You know how long they made Ryan sign one for? 140 years. And I was laughing because he told me the other day, he said, Dad, I figured out why they did that. I'm like, why? He said, because he read something that people born in the 90s are going to live to be like 120 or 140. I go, well, you still won't be able to tell your secrets. They made sure of that, right? But here's my point. Yeah, it's just so important for us to understand it's not about your strength, it's about his. It's not about what you can't do, it's about what he can do. He can do all things. But the question is, are we willing to step out of the way and let him? How do you get a heart mended when you've lost a loved one? Think about that. Yep. It's hard, but you know what? I think God can heal that spot, but for a lot of people, it never gets healed. Okay? That's one of the hardest areas to turn over to God. Okay? It just is. And because that is an in-your-face thing, right? I always used to think, okay, I can do this. I can do this. And you have a lot of self-confidence. You think about all those things that you can do. And, you know, I've kind of had to figure out over the last 25, 30 years, especially the last few years, that there's a lot of things now physically I just can't do. It's just, okay, I just can't do it. And, you know, it's hard to admit that. But then I think about my favorite hero in the Bible, and I'll close because I knew my time would go. His name is Caleb. And I love this guy. He's always been my hero. See, he was one of those spies that went into the promised land, but he wasn't one of the guys that came back and said, oh, man, they're so big and we're so tiny, we better not do this. He's one of those guys came back and said, hey, man, let's go. We can do this because God said we could do this. Well, when it came time to go into the promised land, there wasn't really anybody left. Remember, that whole generation perished. Caleb didn't. Joshua didn't, because they were the ones that brought back the good report. Joshua became the leader. So it comes time to go in and take over this land. And they kind of said to him, hey, Caleb, why don't you just take this land here on this side of the river? You're kind of old now, you know, and, you know, this would be a lot easier. You know what he told him? He said, no. And I love what he said, because you know physically this is not a statement that is true in his physical ability. He said, I'm just as strong now as I was back then. And how many know he was a whole lot older? How many know physically there's no way? But you know what he was saying? Yeah, that's a good way to live. And I look at that, but here's what Caleb was saying. It wasn't about him. The same way he would have conquered that mountain 40 years ahead of that was the same way he believed he conquered it then. Because it wasn't by might, it wasn't by power, but it was through the Spirit of the Lord that would give him the ability to overcome. Isn't that cool? Anyway, we come full circle in our Bible study. If you would, you can stand with me. We'll close. If you have offering,